Hello again, and welcome back, all my warriors. Today we are doing chapter 45, which is 1056. I have with me a lovely cup of tea, and yeah, I'm excited to be reading to y'all. So then, 1056. The King of Norway stood on the wooden deck of the mighty Drakar, the great wooden longship. This ship stood as a representation of his power, great, capable of holding 120 men, brilliantly decorated. It was named the Grey of the North, and it was known all throughout the North Sea, for it was from this deck that Magnus had done so much of his kingship. That was one more reason the ship inadvertently represented Harald's power. It wasn't his. He inherited the Drakar and the kingship from another. As long as this ship sailed as the Grey of the North, it wasn't his. Just like he was forced to think of the kingdom, no matter how much war he executed, lands he claimed, taxes he collected, his thoughts would not let him think of it as his. No one treated him as though he were illegitimate. No one would dare. But in his soul, he felt a twinge of that impostor he thought himself at times to be. He hated that man. He fucked queens and ravaged his enemies and went on daring expeditions to prove who he was, what he was. He hoped one day it would be enough. He hoped one day even he would believe it. For the moment, he watched as the Danish coast grew further around him, as his army sailed into the place called Limfjord. This fjord was so made by God that it began like a river mouth, and then after widened to almost the breadth of a sea. He'd ordered his men to beach their ships on an island he'd seen, and all steered to it. As the island approached, he reminisced about his adventure some months ago. Then he had watched as the north coast of Iceland shrank away. It had been the middle of the autumn then, and the Grey of the North was going far past the reaches of the realm to see what lay at the frozen-most corners. Their stay in the land of laws and speakers had been pleasant. The Icelanders had strange food and strange customs, but their stories and their justice was unparalleled. He thought perhaps to steal some of their ideas he'd heard about. The island had held a thing while he was there, and he'd met with the law speaker many times, so he was confident he could amend the laws of his own land. He especially liked the idea of an Althing, where the lords and jarls would meet all together to discuss laws and settle legal disputes. His kingdom had a version of this convention already, but it would do better being a yearly attendance instead of all coming unsummoned at all times of the year. That was far more work than he wanted to have to do all the time, and so a yearly gathering made more sense. He remembered that ominous view, how on the horizon before them were dark gray clouds, not perhaps a storm, but not the calmest of weather. The sunset was long away, no matter how late in the day it was. This close to summer still, they'd only get more and more light the further north they went. Growing up in Norway, Harald had seen all kinds of bright midnights, but he wanted to see that effect stronger. The light later in the year than he was used to. Being king meant nothing if you couldn't hunt down the things you wanted and make them yours. Harald was a hunter. He knew he was. He had to be. Then he stood at the prow of the ship, again looking out over the expanse of the sea before him, with all the world open to his direction. Again. He rose and fell with the waves as the bow dipped and climbed, his attention never wavering from the horizon. Darkness crowding before me, the lightness there behind. I seek the endless sunset, even if it's only in my mind. This way is not discovered. This path is not set forth. As fast as these sail wings will take me, I go to seek my worth. A tear came to his eyes. He looked on the strange gray north before him. His wives were at home raising his children back in Nidaros. His armies were out raiding along the North Sea. Attendants and scribes and jarls were busy running every nuance of the governance that was his kingdom. Everything that needed doing was being cared for. He had this great wilderness ready for him and nothing else to do but to explore. That expedition had been dangerous and nearly fatal. The cold and the cloistering of the ice had been intense everywhere, and the ships had barely escaped altogether. The food had run scarce, and the water went low. They hunted for seals and fished, but the lack of water had been the ultimate decision in their return. Regardless of having to turn back sooner than he'd wanted to, Harald had achieved the one goal he'd set for himself in the doing of the journey. There was a night. Perhaps it was not night, but it was dark already, or still, when Harald's Drakar had stopped on the edge of a great ice floe. The anchor was struck into the ice, and the men prepared to camp a night in the frigid winds, and Harald stood on the ice and began to walk away from his men. This was a barren land, away from the wiles and treachery of men or women, and this was what Harald wanted to see. A land without land, where the only threat was the world itself. Harald walked alone in the darkness and unutterable quiet of the tundra. He heard only his own foot crunching on the snow beneath him, and there before him he saw the unearthly green of the aurora, the dead blue of the night sky, and the glowing white of the ice. He felt like he was flung away from the whole of earth, there alone above everything. Here I stand, at the dark failing boundaries of a savage world. The farthest man north in the world, alone, alone! I finally had to turn back when the extreme limit of the world disappeared into the fog before my eyes. I barely escaped the gaping ravine of the abyss. That had been an exceptional voyage. The stories were already going around the kingdom of the intrepid king surveying the unknown extents of the oceans. He reveled in the idea of his reputation being so bolstered. He was thrust back to the present as their two ships landed on the shore, the keels scraping upon the beach and grinding to a halt. Harald was again the first to leap from the ship and sank up to his ankles in the wet sand. There before him was the forest upon the island, and he tried to shake away the memories that plagued him. Right now, he needed to focus on the troubles his armies were dealing with. All the thoughts of adventure and reality of ruling his kingdom swirled in his mind. He had still not fully succeeded in instituting the Althing as it was done in Iceland speaking. Stop it, he said aloud to himself, shaking his head. You're the king, first off the boat and staring at hostile unknown lands. Be here and do this. He stood and tried to focus. Water. We need water. There were issues facing his army at the moment, and his distraction from the world around him was not good for the mind of a king. His mind. He was king. He was king. Set camp and set watch. Have an armed archer at the back of each ship and watch the fjord. They are to warn us all in great shouts at the first sign of a ship. I don't care if it's a fishing ship. We need to know of its presence. Tell these scouts that the first to see a ship is to be given a golden coin for their work. Those setting camp, I want you out in the forest now searching for water. Clean water. Anything found will be no good if it has stagnated. Take a test of it, but not overmuch, for one cannot trust the first drink. The whole of his army bustled around him and did as he bid to every word. Everyone else is set to rest and prepare. Svein is out there, and I will have the army ready for him when he comes. It has been so damn quiet on this raiding expedition. Our men will not be ambushed by the enemy so long as I am leading them myself. Keep your weapons near, and the armor, well, keep it nearer still. Remember that if you have but one weapon to choose from, to choose always your shield. Armor! A man keeps about him for his own defense, but the shield he carries for the protection of his own kin and fellows. Finally, I want a store of our resources made together. Set someone to be the guardian of our supplies and make sure that we have food enough to reach home. And if we don't want to estimate what we'll need to hunt. the water issue I am working on, but have some count to our stores. We'll dig for it if we have to. The orders he barked out in rapid order to his disembarking men, and they stood near to listen and memorize his list. They knew that to fail in this could mean jailing or death, so each man had a direct interest in hearing each word and caring for it to memory. They built a fire and set out the watch as Harald had specified, and despite being at rest, the army felt like it was gathering in force. Everything about this year's raiding had been hard, harder than ever before. It seemed like every aspect of the Danelands was set against them, which made sense, but it was especially harsh this year. Every town they went to had resisted their advance with arms or with refusal to aid under threat. The people were all fighting at every turn. It seemed that Svein had somehow organized all his people to resist the powerful king no matter the cost to their homes. Harald's usual tactic for supply on the raids was to arrive at a fishing or farming village and demand tribute in return for letting them live. And this year, thus far, everyone had been more interested in offering them battle and skirmish despite the risks to their livelihoods. His army had weathered and worn, and this only served to harden the men and encourage a greater devotion to his orders when they came. My lord, king, we found a slithering worm, one of his warriors said, producing a serpent coiling around his arm. Excellent! Warm it by the fire and drive it to thirst, Harald said distractedly. My lord king, the reports were correct. This is an island we rest on the night. Harald nodded. That is well, too. Now keep the watch to the flanks, especially. If any army lands behind us, we are undone. And make sure to watch the far side of the island, for if they come from the mainland by ship, we could miss them until they are upon us. Yes, my lord. The worm is heating, lord. Good. Get the string around it and follow it, he said dismissively. He needed something grand and bold to defeat Svein with. The yearly raids were good for his kingdom. The income earned by all those involved helped to strengthen the people's love for him and fill his coffers at the same time. Everyone wanted to work on these raids, and the money was shared fairly. The people were happy with his rule, as long as the war continued. Who here was with me when I went to the north, to the frozen seas? He asked around the fire. I was, Lord King, Håkon said. And I, Arix agreed. Those two were always with him, so this didn't surprise him to hear. No one else? The Drakar was full to bursting, it seemed, when we went. Full of supply and men, but that can only take 6 score, said the Jarl, Ivar. And you were left back in Norway to govern, old friend. You should go. I should go again. There is much that can be learned there. New lands, the icy expanse, could have lanes open in the flows. What foreign kingdom, distant kingdoms, might we find if we but dig through the ice? The world is an endless sea of land to discover. What is south of Africa? And what is east of that? How far can west go? I say, all the way my sovereign can press it. Is it true that you made to Vinland as well, Lord King? Harald smiled. That distant shore. The undiscovered place. A sheer land of mountains and rivers where there's more trees in the forest than there are stars in the sky. All about him sat wrapped in the poetry of his word, his story. Wine, Lord King? Asked one of his serving men. Yes, make sure you all don't drink too much of this. We are low in water, and I'll not have you starved for drink. He accepted the cup of wine and raised it. To my gallant crew, under the glory of God. What about Vinland? Did you venture far into the land? Asked Ivar. Not too much, but we didn't need to. It is truly an amazing place, friends. The game there teems in such amount that you could find a herd of deer at every bend in the river. The fish in the sea and lakes were so abundant, they would jump straight into your boat to escape their fellows. Never a night was it cold. The warmth of this land was like nothing I've known outside of the desert. The fires we shared each night were all made so high as a house. This place has everything a man could need in his life. But the people who live there are wild. he said with his hands out towards they who listened intently. He knew when he has an audience captivated. These Skraeling, you see, paint themselves in war paint all the times. They wear the skins of animals and are remarkable hunters. In fact, I have never heard nor seen a people who are attuned to the forest and the world around them. It is as though they are a part of nature. Excuse me. Did you fight them? We did not. We had no need to. We traded some. They gave us pelts of great size that we were told were not bare, and we gave to them wooden barrels for storing water. I don't know if they needed or wanted them, but our guide said it was a good trade. I am told they were also capable warriors, but their weapons seem to be made from stick and stone, nothing to our steel clearly. Regardless of this, they know their land well, and so warring with them is no easy feat. Lord King, the serpent was followed underground. Harald nodded. That's good. He spent a moment lost in thought. The journeys he'd been on, the stories he'd heard, all things came back to him as he smiled into the fire. And the time I slew an emperor and seduced the empress, I had to steal the woman's own niece to escape her. She lusted for me so much. And then that niece too wanted to come with me, but I have a higher standards. He laughed and drank. He was dimly aware that none were following along this story the same way he was his own. And Thorir, I called him Cutjaw. The boy was an idiot. He needed to know why we were there fighting, what we were fighting for. Gold, God damn it! Money, silver, wealth, God damn it! Trying to convince a man to push for his own benefit like that. That's not something a ruler should allow for his men. He deserved what he got. His fate was sealed with that knife as soon as he was the Cutjaw. We found water, called one of the warriors running over. The worm went underground and we found the water after we dug it up. Come and help to dig. There's water. The warriors all stood and ran to help with the effort. As many men as could be spared ran off from the fire to go hunting for water. Harald took another drink. The heat of the fire washed across his face and hands as he sat in the sand. Perhaps he should have his men bring out a wooden chair for him. Stop it, he said again, and shook once more. My lord king, the Danes are at the mouth of the fjord. They'll be here in an hour, said a runner who'd sprinted from the right side. The water was just starting to be brought over in buckets, and the men carrying them froze in the middle of what they were doing. They stood still before the fire, and all eyes turned to the king. Again, he felt the strange moment of utter focus that was needed for a leader of men to attain. He stood from the sand, the wine cup tumbling from his hand, and regarded his men. He reveled a moment in the total stillness as they all waited on his word and none spoke or tried to assume his position of power. The water is still paramount. Do not stop that effort. Split the force. The greatest part will start to prepare the ships for leaving. Get everything together and have us ready to go to the sea at the moment. What is the force of the Danes? Large, lord. They are many ships, but they are still at the entryway, where they can only enter one at a time. They won't be here in an hour. They will want to form together for their fleet before they come and attack us. Well done, man. You'll be mentioned in my history. The second part I shall continue with gathering and storing as much water as possible. Get barrels and skins and anything else that might be useful. We do not want to run low on water again, ever again. Now that's all of your parts. Go and get to the work, now. My lord king, said a young warrior who, to him while everyone else was working. Yes. Why should we not set a watch for the Danes? That is already set. Do not bother my mind with other things like this. Go to the work now, Thorir. Yes, lord. I'm not. Harald disregarded the man. and turned to continue leading his men. The whole of the army then worked to form two large groups so directed, and the confluence of defined purpose and intent, effort, worked like a machine to force the world to change according to one man's will. The water hole was dug deeper, the buckets carried back and forth, the ships were untied and ready, the sailors made to leave. They were done, all the work they'd set out in an hour. The water barrels were distributed onto the ships evenly, and then each man prepared to shove off. 20 warriors on both sides, each braced against the wood and pushed together as Harald ordered the heave. Finally, the ships were put to sea, and the oars speared out from the sides in a haste. Once they were out, they could see the Danish fleet forming into a tight block and making for them. Heave! Harald ordered, and the oars all turned the ship the other way. Heave! He called again, and the dragon ships, the Drakar, flew. Each man upon an oar knew the threat posed by the coming Danes. If they were caught, they would fight like beasts, each man, and they would all be tossed into the sea after they were killed. King Harald, where are we going? Asked Ivar. At the moment, and for now, we're going deeper into the fjord. We have to get a good distance from the Danes. Get me a map. What? We can't just keep rowing forever deeper here. We cannot. But I have been to this fjord before. He smiled as a map of the region was unrolled before him. There he saw the whole of the fjord and the island they'd been on, and there was a narrow strip of the land that separated this part of the fjord from the North Sea beyond it. Harald grinned. Jarl Ivar the White. Have I ever told you about the time I escaped Miklagard? He shouted over the growing roar of the surf as the wind blew through his hair. You have, Lord King, he responded carefully. We jumped the chain, he said to himself. Then he grinned wildly. Continue on this course. Make for the neck of Lusbreid. We get there by nightfall, and this shall be our salvation, friends, my fine warriors. Aye, King Harald, they all replied without hesitation. Ivar looked back and forth between them, surprised again to see the devotion they showed so immediately. Heave! He called, and they all pulled together with the force of the determination to survive. He saw again the look in their eyes, the strange and total focus that comes from having every moment of one's will directed at the action of continued life. Harald looked back. Svein's fleet were still assembling and must have seen the ships on the horizon by now. It wouldn't matter. Goodbye, old friend. Sorry I had to use you like that, but I got everything I wanted from it, so I'm really not that sorry. His attention turned back toward their goal and leaned forward into the wind. Heave! By nightfall, they reached the far place in the fjord that is called Lusbreid. As the Drakar both approached the shores, Harald broke with everyone's expectations and called that they press faster their rowing. The great dragon ship sped through the water, slicing the waves apart as their mad pace. Brace! Here comes the land! He shouted, and each sailor pulled their oars one last time to leave the paddles aiming for the back of the ships. They all then held tight to the seats beneath them with one hand, and the ships crashed. Simultaneously, the bows of the Drakar struck the beach and rode up onto the sands with a violent scratching that was familiar, but to a greater tumult than any had ever heard before. Stow the oars! Harald said, before the ships were stopped moving, and the army followed the command with efficiency. He watched them work, but didn't even let them finish before giving the next command. Good! Now over the side, onto the beach! Hurry! You behind, throw the goods to the other. Now move, you dogs! The king ordered, and the men literally jumped to the action. They leapt overboard like it was a raid under arrow shot, and the work began. All the heavy cargo were passed, if not thrown from the sides to the waiting men below. It took some time for them to unload all the boxes and sacks, as they'd taken with them quite a hefty store of materials for their exertion, and still had run out of water quicker than they'd expected. Ropes and fastens! You're either towing the ship up overland or you're carrying the goods to the far side. Now! Take what you can carry and run it. Once set down, come back for more. He turned to Ivar. We leave a contingent behind to guard what hasn't been taken. I leave that in your command, Jarl. Yes, Lord King, the man said with a smile. The ropes were set to secure points along the Drakar, and Harald ran to grab a section of the rope. This drew looks of surprise from many around him, but he smiled back into their faces. Heave! He shouted, and the men all grunted at once as they pulled, and the dragons left the water to start their run upon the lands. From there, the men pulled in a consistent strain, and the ships ground across the terrain, leaving deep, hull-shaped channels where they went. Dragon tracks for the enemy to know what we have done, Harald said. Perfect! This fight will be told of in story throughout all the north. Harald shouted, still pulling the rope over his shoulder. The goods and the ships took hours to reach the other side, but with all the combined effort of 240 men, all bound to a unified purpose, they managed to win the far shore. They wove around some few trees, across streams, and had men move large rocks out of their way. Their work was exhausting, but they knew what drew closer behind them every second, and so they worked. Get the ships into the water and be ready to launch. Is that all the cargo? He called, and Ivar appeared at his side. Every last bit, he replied. We are ready. Load it all. My lord king, Svein and his men are landing behind us. They mean to come and take us. Then load. Heave and get us into the water. Aye, lord king, they all replied together. The mad rush of work was encouraged at each moment by the biting necessity of speed. They could each envision the Danish forces coming out from the thin tree cover and raining arrows down on them, so they hurried the difficult work. 3/4 of the men were ordered into ships to pull out the oars at the front, while the other quarter waded into the waves and braced their shoulders against the tails of the dragons. Launch! Harald ordered once they were ready, and the ships were pushed from those shore by men who stood up to their waist in water, and those at the front pulled oars. The ships bobbed at the front, but no movement came from the effort. Harder! I said launch! Push! The men renewed their will, and the summoned up all their effort they were capable of exerting and pushed. The ship's resistance broke down to a thin line, and the ship began to crawl over that line. 2 great drakar slithered into the North Sea, and the men, still in the water, hurriedly climbed on to get on board. These men all dropped to the deck and panted for the effort of their push. Heave! Harald said. He gave no order that the soaked men need obey. They who'd been on board now worked the command. The oars pulled through the water, and the ship left the earthen bonds of the Danish coast. Every single man here breathes a sigh of relief, I hear, Harald said loudly. Each man here has seen a dragon's flight. Each man here has flown as the dragons flew. My dauntless, never-wearied crew! Our Viking steed rushed through the sea as Viking-like fast sailed we! Harald shouted through the heavy panting of exertion. Look, Lord King, Ivar called from the other ship. There, look, King, look. It's the forces of Svein. They all stopped rowing and stood to look at the beach they had just left, seeing the gathering force of the army that narrowly missed them. Svein! Harald shouted back. Is that you old boar? Looks like my wit has outdone thee again. Come on and order your men into the sea. Come on, Svein. Come catch me. All the men aboard both Drakar laughed. The Norsemen all began shouting their own jibes back at the army that had very nearly caught them. They laughed, Some pulled free their cocks and pissed straight into the water. Their boasting and laughter were all pressed out by the heightened energy that came from realization that they had won a battle without fighting for a moment. Hell yeah. Love that chapter. Another one of the instances of, so apparently that actually happened. Harald is said to have found this place and they heated a snake. The saga says that they heated a snake by the fire and then let it free, and then they found out where it went underwater, and then they dug there and they found water, underground. I meant. It's just such a strange story. It's part of the saga, but you know, really weird. And then to have the ships being pulled over land to get to the other side and just row away. It was too reminiscent of the time that he hopped the chain in Miklagard. So I absolutely had to make the connection between those two events. It was just so cool, so fascinating. Love it. Love it, love it, love it. I probably said this a couple times already. I'll say it again. Harald Sigurdsson, his story absolutely reads like a Viking Jack Sparrow. The guy was just mad. It was great. So great. Thank you so much for joining me again, and I will see you in the next one.